Thank you very much, Leslie. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening. And no pressure after that introduction. But yeah, I remember that meeting too, and what a great memory you have. It was a lovely afternoon. But my name is Victor, and I'm an alcoholic. And my sobriety date is January the 14th of this year, although I walked into the doors of Pavillon on February the 20th of the same year. And we'll get to that a little bit later. I was born into a well-to-do family, I suppose. We moved out to Africa when I was quite young, spent several years there, came back, and my sister was born when I was about 4 years old. I think that's when perhaps feelings of abandonment started to set in, because I was dropped like a hot rock and my father spent all his time doting on her. When I was 8, I was packed off to boarding school. So those feelings set in a little bit more. And I think it was probably around 8 or 9 when my first introduction to a drink was. Didn't like it very much. So yay, that was a good start. But roll forward a few years and I'm 13. My parents are throwing a party at their new house. And they were serving Bucks Fizz, which to those that aren't familiar with the English vernacular, that is just champagne and orange juice. But it was coined, the name was given to it after a pop band that had won the Eurovision Song Contest that year, I think. And I was helping myself quite liberally to these Bucks Fizz. And sometime during the afternoon or evening, I was quite ill, and my mother dissolved a kitchen cloth, cleaning up after me. Of course, the following day I swore that I would never drink again. And I'm sure that lasted for about 2 years, 3 years, until I was 16. And parties were the norm. We couldn't drive until we were 17 in the UK. Legal drinking age is 18. And so, my mother would drop me off at friends' houses, always, of course, staying over the night, supervised. Okay, you might frown on parents and what have you, letting their minors have some drinks, but that was just the norm. And parties were fairly common. And then once I could drive, we were able to go out and just be at friends' houses liberally. Still in boarding school. I wasn't able to drive away from school, so didn't have access to alcohol a lot while I was in school until I was 18. The legal drinking age, as I said, is 18 in the UK. And we were allowed to drink on campus in a structured environment. It was only, you couldn't go to the local pubs. You could go to the common room on campus. And I think the limit was 4 beers. And so that was great. But obviously, there is always a way for somebody who wants more, and I wasn't the only one, not that that makes it correct, to get more. And that's been my makeup, was more is always better, and it doesn't matter what it is. And I ended up getting ill that night, and my housemaster found me, and I was called what's known as busted. So you end up in fairly heavy detention and a few other bits and pieces for that. It seemed a little unfair to me because I was drinking quote unquote legally, but I'd had more than I was supposed to, and so there was consequences for that. My father died when I was 17, and I remember his older sister commenting that he would have been so proud that his son had finally done something wrong, which I don't think in hindsight was perhaps the right thing to say to a fledgling alcoholic. But it was funny at the time. But roll forward several years and not so funny. I was never very successful with ladies. My first relationship, if you could call it that, was an affair. I was 19, she was 36. And so that started a lifestyle, I suppose you could call it, of illicit relationships. I was married at around 21, 22. That marriage lasted for 9.5 years. And it wasn't really until the later stages of that marriage where there was any infidelity. Drinking became heavier throughout that relationship. And what I didn't see at the time was, it wasn't that my wife then wanted less to do with me. She wanted less to do with the alcoholic. And so that I took as, well, you don't want me, so I'll go elsewhere. Not the case. I just wasn't capable of speaking up, saying what was on my mind, asking for help. By that time, I think alcohol had already started to take a pretty good grasp, and the switch that one needs to pause and think it through was broken. And as I explained to a friend of mine several years later, when he asked about drinking, I said, James, I just don't have an off switch. Once I start, it doesn't stop. And so that made some sense to him. So that was the first failed marriage. That followed several years of just various relationships, and then another marriage, which only lasted for 18 months. That person tried to help me see the light, failed, because I think if one is honest with oneself, it doesn't matter how much another person tries to say you have a problem, you need to go and get help. It's not until you have hit, or I hit, a bottom that I was able to go and ask for help. And God bless my third wife, who I'm still married to, for continuing to try and drive that nail home. I started that relationship, and having gone through some relationship therapy due to a failed relationship before then, I thought I had the tools to succeed. And that alcohol wasn't a problem in addition to needing help with relationships. Turns out that wasn't the case. Whilst I was still actively drinking, I still wasn't capable of being honest with myself, let alone another human being. And so the relationship went on. My infidelity was sporadic. It was always for opportunity's sake. It was that more needing for me. And that broken switch with alcoholism just made it easy. The guilt, though, was never easy to deal with, and that led to more drinking. And I think drinking every night, I had rationalized that I wasn't an alcoholic because I wasn't getting up in the morning and reaching for a drink, therefore not an alcoholic. Give me 10 years of thinking that way, and I think I came to the conclusion that I was a functioning alcoholic. And I could live with that because I still wasn't getting up in the morning and reaching for a drink. So more power to me. I knew plenty of people who were doing the same thing. So it must be okay. It's no excuse, but the pandemic hit, and it affected a lot of us. And I'm sure I've got friends on this meeting tonight who feel very similarly. And I was forced to work from home. Darn, I still have a job. You know, how unfortunate to be given the opportunity to work from home, keep a roof over my head, over my wife's head. And I was committed at that point to being faithful. I really thought I had that licked. But text messages continued. The individual happened to work at my place of business as well, and keep the alcohol flowing. And my wife tried and tried to help me see that I was drinking too much. In June of 2020, I did finally make a phone call to a therapist in the Wilmington area who happens to be an alumna of Pavillon. And I'd had his number in my wallet for 6-8 months, and sort of played lip service to my wife saying, yeah, I'll give him a call. And the other thing about my drinking was, if ever it was called out or behaviors were called out, I would do just enough to set the ship right and for the incident to blow away, and then those behaviors would start up again. I don't think that was a conscious thing. It just was my MO. You would pour oil on stormy waters, it would calm down, and then it wasn't long before I was just right back to doing what I always do, which was serving myself. And I just didn't see it. I was brought up better than that. And I think that's one of the things that really weighed heavily on me, and certainly weighs more heavily on me now as I can see it, is, you know what, you were taught better than that. I was taught right from wrong. And my father, although I think he was an alcoholic, tried to encourage me to take an hour over each drink. And as I described to you, when I was 13, that didn't last. And it was the same thing in adult life, especially when I was living with my mother before I moved to the US. Her house was 300 meters up the road from a pub. So I would leave work, come home, walk to the pub, and have a good night. But back to more recent events. My therapist tried to help me improve my relationship with alcohol. And I'm sure, being a good therapist as he is, he knew that that day that I needed more than a better relationship with alcohol. I needed to call that relationship quits, but we didn't go there that day. And as I'd mentioned, it was during the pandemic. He was seeing people face to face for a while. And then the mandates started to come in for masks, and in person just didn't suit him. Fair enough. You know, he's got a business to maintain and clients who may be more sensitive to people having been around COVID cases than others. So he started Zoom meetings. And whilst I grew to appreciate the benefit of a Zoom meeting while I was at Pavillon, I certainly didn't appreciate the Zoom meeting with my therapist. And I used that as an I used it as an excuse to not see him anymore. I can't lie about that. It just didn't work for me. And that was all that mattered. And I felt that, again, I had a good handle on it. I'd curbed my enthusiasm for alcohol for that little bit because I was seeing this person regularly. So I was being given regular reminders. But what also in my alcoholic brain was ringing alarm bells was that I got this number from my wife, and she knew him as a, not that I knew that relationship, but knew him as a patient where she works. And so, of course, my conspiracy theorist said, well, you know, this is just a bad idea anyway, because the more I tell him, the more chance there is of her getting to find out. And as I sit and think about that today, no, the more chance there was that I was actually going to own up to my own wrongdoings and alcoholism and infidelity, and maybe just have to tell somebody who I really am. And that didn't sit well with me. So I just turned a blind eye to it. There had never been any serious consequences for my actions in the past. There was always the apology the following day. I mean, the nights out that I wrecked because I wasn't able to take care of the people I had taken out. And by people, I mean ex-wives, current wives, girlfriends, whatever. Guy friends, you know, you go out with them for an evening and you've agreed to be the responsible party and you're not. And I keep saying you, it's me. I was not. And even when my wife and I made a plan to go out, and I would be the DD, or I would be the one that wouldn't drink so much, so that when we got into the Uber, my wife felt safe that I was able to handle anything if that driver was not on the up and up, went out the window. And people have said since, you know, we never knew there was a problem. You know, it was just, you were always having a good time. You threw parties, you had a good time, you came to our parties, whatever. Well, yeah, but you never went home with me. And that really began to hit home, is that, you know, everyone around me, other than those I claimed to love so much, only ever saw good time Victor. And when I was having a great time, I was having a great time. But it didn't take much after a skinful to not know who I was going to be. And, you know, my wife says a lot, she walked on eggshells. She didn't know who she was going to get. Sometimes I was a happy drunk, sometimes I was a not so happy drunk. And my temper would flare very quickly. And the justifications come out, and never physically abusive, at least not what I've been told about. And so that I suppose is a plus, but the emotional wreckage that I caused through my actions, just that came down heavily on me when I was at Pavillon. So on January the 11th, somebody knocked on my wife's office door who works at the company I work for, and said, you need to know that your husband has been around somebody who has been self-reported as being in contact with COVID positive people. And oh, by the way, they've been carrying on some sort of relationship for quite some time. So I came home. I was upstairs conducting a conference call. No, I wasn't. Did I come home? No, I was already at home because we were still under quarantine. So I was conducting a conference call. I came downstairs and there were 2 bottles of water on the dining room table. And I should have known that something was up then. And I was challenged. And I came 75% clean. There was no hiding it. They just rip the Band-Aid off, do it. I emailed my therapist that night, and he was able to see me on January the 14th. My last drink was on January the 13th. And he picked up the pieces, and I laid the 75% out for him as well. Some reason that alcoholic still didn't trust the guy whose number he got from his wife. And so it's like, if I tell him everything, what was I afraid of? I'd already admitted to a stack of crap. But no, there was still, if I can just hide this or what have you, I was still in that very alcoholic, lying frame of mind, and it just seemed better than the final piece. So 5.5 weeks, my wife and I worked on that, and she was polite and kept just nudging me. There's a piece that you're not telling me. There's a piece that you're not telling me. And on the 17th of February, that final piece came out. I had never seen an individual that upset as I saw my wife that night. And on the 18th, I went to see my therapist again, and he gave me a list of places to call. And none of them were Pavillon, oddly enough, because he wanted somewhere that would help me not only with alcoholism, but also with the infidelity. And that, as you know, is not Pavillion's primary modus of operation. Called around, and I just couldn't afford anywhere that he'd given me. And so he said, you know what, here's where I went. And I think a 12-step program is going to work for you. It doesn't matter. It's a 12-step program. It's good for life. It's not just alcohol. And so give these guys a call. And as luck would have it, in January, I had called my financial advisor, and I needed cash quick for something else. Didn't get it that day, but he goes, I'm in recovery too. I haven't had a drink for 4 years. I was like, oh, that was a slight weight that had lifted off my shoulders. Like, crikey, I'm not alone. There's somebody I know who can help me, who's already going through what I'm going through. Not exactly, but So then I was able to call him again and say, I need that money tomorrow. That happened. And my wife offered to drive me up to Pavillon. I didn't find out until after I got back that wasn't her idea. It was actually our therapist's. I lost my therapist in the deal. He ended up treating my wife. But no, it's a good thing. And I'll tell you why later. But it was great. 5.5 hours of fairly uncomfortable conversation, but at least we were talking. And a lot of phone calls made to family and friends, and some fairly strained ones to a couple of family, my mother in particular. I arrived at Pavillon, and you know what? This was nothing different. It was boarding school. It was whatever you want to call it. I had been in the army. I knew barrack block life. It's like, okay, I can do this. But it was emotional. The intake process was fantastic. I mean, everybody was so caring. From my first encounter to all of the facility staff to all of the treatment staff, everybody just genuinely seemed to care. At a time when I really needed people to care. And I got there because my therapist said, Vic, you need to do something drastic, or you're going to repeat the same behaviors, and you will never have a chance with a relationship with anybody, let alone with your wife. So initially, I look back on it and figure I was running away from a problem, because that's what I always do. I run, and leaving a gap there so that it would blow over again. And it took a couple of weeks of Charlie Dennis, who I believe unfortunately is no longer there, but he was my counselor, and just kept telling me to drop the bat and get out of the meat grinder. And I didn't quite understand the drop the bat reference because I'm not a baseball fan. But really, he was not talking about that. He was talking about the club that I kept beating myself over the head with. Just drop it, slow down. And so it took a couple of weeks while I was there to really understand that I couldn't be there because if I did this, then I would salvage my relationship. I finally came to understand that if I was going to stay there, I had to be there for me, and everything else would fall into place. Now, it still took some self-convincing. It took, really paying attention and listening, to begin to understand that I had to accept that I was worthy of the time and effort that others were putting into me. And yeah, they wanted my success, but at the end of the day, my success was up to me. And what I was going to get out of my time at Pavillon depended very much on what I was prepared to put in. And was I prepared to share? Was I prepared to engage with others, be honest with myself and those that were asking questions of me? You figure you're never going to see these people again. Wrong. For those of you who just turned up at Pavillon, you will make some great friends while you are in those halls. It's a shame that, through ethics, we're not allowed to stay in touch with, on a friendship basis with people that are still working for Pavillon, because some of them are definitely people I would count among friends. And there are those on this call tonight. But you will make friends with people, some of the unlikeliest sorts as well. And you will hear stories that are way worse than what I've just told you. And you're going to think, and when you're asked to speak, you're going to think, I have nothing to say. I've got nothing to share. I've just heard the most egregious horror story at an AA meeting today. And no, trust me, it will resonate with somebody, that your story will be what they're going through. And, if you're having a struggle with the whole God concept, because I did struggle with that when I first arrived. The big book is littered with a reference to God here and God there. And I was in Christian schools growing up, but I had got away from active religion because I just saw a lot of hypocrisy there. And it wasn't for me. It didn't suit me. There we go again. It's all about me. And one of my friends who I still talk with today, during a group session, I think Jason was leading that, and I have a feeling he's not there right either. But he said, well, how about make it an acronym? I went, gracious, omnipotent deity. Yeah, I can do that. So then it didn't become this white bearded person sitting on a cloud ruling over everybody. It became whatever I wanted it to be. And my higher power showed up in the most unlikely places. I got letters from people who are my wife's friends and my wife's colleagues, who knew everything that my wife had cared to share with them. And you can imagine the pain that my wife went through sharing those stories. And yet here were letters of support. And I was going through a particularly low moment one day. And that evening after the group meeting, the mail call, I got, I think, 5 or 6 letters, all sequentially postmarked. And 2/3 of them were from people I had no business receiving mail from. And that did my head in, as far as beginning to understand that if these people were prepared to take the time to write to me and wish me support and know that there was something better, then surely I could see that there was something worth working on and working for and working toward. And it began to sink in. I think when Leslie recounts of meeting me walking, I didn't spend a lot of time in the common rooms talking to people. I use the word idle chit chat not as a derogatory term, but I needed to spend time with me and noodling stuff. So I would walk up and down that tarmac road. I'd put in, I don't know, 6 miles a day on that road whenever I could. And it did a lot of good for me, just making use of that time by myself. And all of a sudden the question would be answered, or something in the clouds would be there. Talk to Wolf about dragons. That's just a fantastic conversation. He also helped me. Wolf and Kay on the spiritual side helped me immensely to begin to gain a contact with a higher power and understand that it doesn't have to be a person or a thing. It can be whatever you like. And to that end, I wrote down in a journal that I filled while I was there, could my wife be my higher power? Because I always saw her as living a life that was a life I wanted to live, very kind to others, always thinking about others. It comes at a price because you don't end up putting yourself in the picture at all. And that's not good. But yeah, whatever works for you is your higher power. I think I've lost my thread there. But yeah, finding that higher power just in odd places. And one of the other things that happened while I was there, on the phone calls, and I was so grateful to have those phone calls, but they turned out to be too frequent. And on one phone call, and something you may find is that 15 minutes, it's not long enough to discuss anything heavy, answer any questions, make decisions, but it is more than ample time to screw things up royally. Because I didn't have the ability to pause and play it through. I was still very much in my old way of thinking, even though it was evolving fairly rapidly. There's still the second guessing, there's still the hiding, there's still the desire to make it easy on myself, whatever. And then you start doubling back and, I didn't mean to say it that way, and it used to make things worse. So the advice that my wife was given by our therapist was, hey, why don't we not speak for a week? And my jaw hit the floor. It's like, these are sort of my lifeline phone calls. I feel like there's still something to go home to. And this wasn't me talking, this was my internal dialogue. But I went, you know what? I can't change it. Okay, let's do it. And I was also worried because it was the lead up to family program. And if you haven't heard about that, or if you're about to go through it and you're worried about it, don't be worried. I think there are 5 questions. Answer them, not how you think the other person wants them answered. Answer them for you. What is it you need as boundaries? I think is one of them, And if you are honest on that piece of paper, when you come away from that conversation, which I'm assuming is still happening via Zoom, I don't think you'll regret it. I certainly didn't. And it was an opportunity for me. It was the first interaction via face that I'd had with my wife in 4 weeks. And it was good. It was good, but you've got to be honest. I knew that if I BS'd it, my wife would see right through it. I would feel guilty as hell. And, I would let not only myself down, but those around me who were cheering me on. And I didn't want to be that person anymore. So I finally got to a point where I woke up one morning going, oh my God, I've only got 4 weeks left. Not, oh crap, I've got 4 weeks. No, I've only got 4 weeks left. I wanted to make sure that I had the conversations with all the people I was supposed to have conversations with. I figured out a little bit late perhaps, but probably just when I was supposed to figure out, if I don't speak up and ask about stuff, I'm not going to get it. And one of the conversations I had with Charlie was, I thought there was going to be more one-on-one time. I thought there was going to be, a lot more of this. And he goes, if you want it, ask for it. And so it's there. It's like, okay, great. Whose lecture have I been to recently that resonated? What was it about? I think Chris Cox and grief. He had me write a letter saying goodbye to myself. And Denny had me write a letter as well. Really, really important exercises. They are hard. I put it off and put it off and put it off until the last minute because that's my MO too. Still is. But such a worthwhile exercise. And yeah, so make the most of your time there. Ask, talk to people. Everyone wants to help. Everyone's got a story. If you haven't heard Chef Brian's story yet, it's a great one, and it's not about alcohol. I won't say any more, but it's a fantastic story. And then EC came up, extended care, for those of you who aren't familiar with that acronym yet. And I went, you know what? No, I didn't feel I had the money yet, and I wasn't prepared to talk about insurance because I hadn't paid for my inpatient so far. So I was like, yes, no. Then so, well, okay, IOP with the breathalyzer. So how long is that? 8 weeks. Yeah, okay, I can do that. I felt that it was more important for me to go home, get back to my job, and try and start rebuilding a marriage. The thing about extended care that hopefully will be explained clearly to you, and I think people tried to explain it to me, I just wasn't listening. It's more about further helping the individual reintegrate into life. I had to reintegrate into a household where my wife had become the primary caretaker of the house. I mean, her daughter's grown. I mean, it's not about taking care of small children. It's about taking care of a broken refrigerator, whatever. She's a very capable person. She had been accustomed to me taking care of stuff. Well, not for the last 6 weeks. So, you know, I had to figure out that I had to reintegrate. EC has a lot to do about the re-socializing. It has a lot to do with some other therapies that they go through. And I didn't fully appreciate that. I'm not certain that I would change my decision because IOP really worked well for me. And I'm not saying that because there's an individual on this call who helped me a lot, but it really is valuable. Again, you will make friends on even via Zoom in those meetings, but you have to put in, otherwise you won't get out. And it's great. By the time you leave Pavillon as an inpatient, and if you do IOP after you've left, you will get to your AA meetings and you'll start working steps with a sponsor, and you'll think, I've done so much of this. And that was one of my struggles. And I decided to bring it up. And I changed my approach to step 4, for instance, in using it as an exercise to work further on core beliefs and challenging those. And it's thanks to IOP that I did that. Otherwise, I think I would have got complacent and bored and screw it, I'm not doing step 4 again. But it was important that I actually do pay attention and work on it. I found a home group. What was interesting about finding a sponsor was my wife was going to Al-Anon, and she was being encouraged to find a sponsor, and I was struggling to find a home group and just somewhere that resonated, and yeah, something that worked with my schedule, you know, being a working stiff. And she said to me one night, so I'll be damned if I find a home group and a sponsor before you do. And so that was my encouragement. It was to beat my wife to finding a sponsor and a home group, and it worked. She's immensely supportive. I am immensely fortunate. It comes at a huge price. There is a lot of work left to do. The brilliant thing today is I have the privilege of doing that work. But I also am being armed with the courage to understand that should the relationship dissolve, it's not the end of the world. It will have dissolved through no lack of trying to talk to each other, but because, you know, it's just not for the two individuals. Today, we're not there. Today, we're still planning trips away. We're still doing a lot of stuff together and talking openly. It doesn't work all the time. And parking lot of Costco the other day, I ran into somebody's car with my buggy and made it all about them when they got out of the car and challenged me. And I felt absolutely terrible because I had been working so hard, and the little things are going to be what really builds up on you. At least they did on me. The tiny stuff builds and builds and builds because I haven't spoken about it. And then all of a sudden something like that happens, and I defaulted right back to the alcoholic. And it couldn't possibly have been my fault. Why the hell did you park that way? And I got in my car after I'd given their $20 to go and get the damn thing buffed out, and nearly broke down. And if I hadn't left and driven away then, I probably would have been sobbing in that parking lot for a good while to come. It was not a pleasant experience. but it was a necessary and valuable one. And the more I stay away from meditating, for instance, or other things that are actively working a program, I can definitely see that there's a correlation into a shortening of temper or letting the little stuff build up. So continuing the practices that I learned in Pavillon and was encouraged to continue in IOP are vital. And that's also a good reason to go to meetings as well. Find a meeting that works for you. As Leslie said earlier, there are hundreds out there, and you'll find the right one for you. I found a really good one, and I go there 4 to 5 times a week, and I'm grateful for it. And yeah, like I said, to today, I'm grateful to be sober. Giving up drinking has not been that difficult, to be honest. Yes, there are days when I go, man, that smoked bourbon looks really good. But today, and I said this in a share the other day, I am no longer the popular monster. And as long as I don't take the cork out of the monster bottle, I stop to play that tape all the way through, I can go to bed pretty happy at night and live a good life and do the next right thing. But if I take that cork out, I will default right back to where I was and then some. And I don't want to do that. So that's me approaching 8 months, and it's a great journey. Just put in what you want to, and you'll get out. It's one of the the rewards are boundless if you just put the effort in. And you will forget from time to time that why you're doing it, but something will remind you, and you'll go, oh yeah, don't do that. Do this. Thank you all very much. I hope that was of use to somebody.